I will never forget the moment the world I had built for 15 years tilted under my feet. It was 5 minutes before sunrise, the hour when the air still tasted like quiet, and the parking lot glowed faintly under the streetlights. I was unlocking the front door of the shop, balancing my thermos and the keys like I had done almost every morning since I was barely out of my teens, when I saw him standing inside with his arms folded and his lips pressed into something that was supposed to look like a smile. That should have been my warning, but I was too tired, too loyal, too used to being the one who kept everything running to imagine what he was about to say. My name is Corinne, and that was the morning my boss called me training wheels in an F1 race. He did not even bother to soften it. He just said it outright, like it was a clever line he had rehearsed on the drive over. I remember the way my fingers froze on the keypad and how my heart knocked once, hard before going quiet. I had opened that store in snow and in heat, in the middle of storms that shut down the rest of the city. And somehow I was still standing there listening to the man whose business I had protected more times than I could count tell me I had become slow, outdated, unnecessary. He said his daughter would be taking over my position, that the company needed fresh energy, that he appreciated my stability but the future required something more. He said this as if he were promoting me to something better, not demoting me to something undefined. I nodded, too polite even then, and asked when she would start. He said today, and my stomach twisted at the thought that he had been planning this, while I had been counting inventory the night before. She showed up a little after 7, wearing bright makeup and carrying a phone on a small tripod. She greeted me like I was a friendly cashier, not the person who had held every system in that building together for a decade and a half. Within 10 minutes, she had filmed 2 videos and left the safe open while chatting with a friend on speakerphone. I saw customers come and go without her noticing. I watched her count the till by rounding numbers up and shrugging at the difference. I watched her glaze over when the delivery driver arrived with questions she did not know how to answer, and I did not step in. That was the part that felt unreal at first. My hands twitched every time she missed a step, but I forced myself to stay still. I had been the fixer for so long, the quiet shadow who prevented disasters before anyone else even smelled smoke. But that morning, standing behind the counter while she flailed through tasks she had never cared to learn, I understood something sharp and simple. Every mistake she made was one I had been absorbing for years. Every fire she ignored was a fire I had been putting out without credit. He thought I was training wheels. He had no idea how many crashes I had kept him from. The burn inside me was slow and controlled. Not rage, not humiliation, although that was there too. It was clarity. I could feel a line inside me straighten, a quiet decision forming without the need for words. I would do exactly as instructed. I would take the back seat. I would no longer save them from the consequences they had earned with their own arrogance. She kept filming, she kept laughing, she kept drifting from task to task without finishing anything. I watched her forget the night report entirely. I watched her leave the store keys on the counter when she went outside to record in better sunlight. He came in that afternoon, proud of her, pleased with himself, acting like he had secured the future. I said nothing. I simply observed. And somewhere behind all of that silence, something inevitable began to take shape. The first sign that everything was starting to slide came 2 mornings after my demotion. Although calling it a demotion was generous, it was more like being pushed off a ledge and asked to cheer on the person who took my place. I arrived before sunrise, the way I always had, slipping into the building with muscle memory guiding every step. The store felt different now, like something slightly off in the air, a hum of imbalance I could feel in my chest. When I reached the office, the night report screen was still open, untouched, blinking like an accusation no one else cared to see. I closed it without finishing it. It was no longer my responsibility. His daughter, Tessa, breezed in an hour later, smelling like coconut lotion and overconfidence. She complimented her own reflection in the freezer door before asking if I had seen her latest video. I said no because I had not and because I did not intend to. She started counting the register while scrolling through comments on her phone, adding numbers in her head and guessing when she got bored. I saw the discrepancy instantly. It was $39 short. an amount that would have sent my boss into a frenzy if anyone else had made the error. When Tessa shrugged and said customers probably stole something, I only nodded and wrote the number in my little notebook. By the end of that week, I had filled 3 pages. The mistakes came steadily, like beads on a string. She misentered a vendor order so badly that we ended up with 20 cases of a product we only sold in small amounts during holiday months. Then she forgot to confirm a refrigeration delivery, which meant the driver refused to unload because the temperature logs were incomplete. Instead of addressing the issue, she blamed him loudly enough that customers paused mid-aisle to stare. She called the supplier incompetent. She called the system confusing. She called me over only when she wanted someone to agree with her, and I simply said I understood and walked away before she could trap me in her mess. My boss, however, defended her with the loyalty of someone who had already decided reality should bend to protect his ego. When I tried to submit the corrected order form, he waved me off and said Tessa would handle it. When customers complained that items were missing from their pickup bags, he said the staff needed better attention to detail. When the refrigeration logs came into question, he sent an email to the entire team reminding us to take our roles seriously, even though the only person who skipped that responsibility was the one he had crowned as the future of the store. Corporate noticed. They always do when money starts leaking and customer surveys sour. The first email was polite. The second was pointed. By the third, they were asking for detailed explanations for inventory fluctuations. That would have been impossible under my watch. My boss responded with vague promises and exaggerated confidence. I could almost hear him insisting everything was under control, even as the walls started tilting around him. I kept opening the store, entering quietly with my thermos and my keys, letting him believe I was fading into the background like he had ordered. In truth, I was taking notes, collecting timestamps, documenting conversations, keeping a running record of each correction I was prevented from making. I was not doing it for revenge, not then. I was doing it because for the first time, I realized how much I had been holding together without acknowledgement. Watching it all unravel without my intervention felt like witnessing a truth finally come into focus. The pressure built in small moments. A regular customer asked why the morning coffee was weak. A vendor complained that Tessa had forgotten to pay an invoice. A corporate rep requested surveillance footage to verify a shipment discrepancy. I watched my boss snap at one employee, then at another, frustration bleeding into anger as he searched for someone to blame who was not his daughter. Tessa kept smiling through all of it, spinning in circles with her phone raised high, filming behind the counter like the store was her personal set. She laughed when the ice machine jammed. She made faces when customers asked for help. She skipped the night report 3 days in a row. Each time she forgot, another bead slid down the string. Another tremor ran through the fragile system my boss insisted was perfectly stable. I felt it building, the way you feel steam rise inside a kettle long before it whistles. A low, tight pressure in the air. A sense of inevitability. The first domino had already fallen. The rest were lining up, ready to go. The call came just after 8 in the morning, right when the store settles into that brief calm between the rush of early shoppers and the trickle of regulars who drift in with slow purpose. I was straightening the front display when my boss barreled out of his office, clutching his phone like it was a live wire. His face was a shade of red I had only seen twice in all my years working there, both times involving inspectors. This time, though, the danger was coming from inside his own carefully built world. A vendor had gone straight to corporate about missing inventory, accusing the store of negligence, miscounts, and unpaid invoices that had apparently been piling up for weeks. I already knew about the invoices. Tessa had ignored every reminder that arrived in the mail slot. She used the envelopes as coasters for her iced coffees, smearing condensation across deadlines she did not care to read. When I saw the vendor pacing outside the loading area 2 days earlier, agitated and demanding answers, I had stepped aside and let the moment take its natural course. He insisted he had delivered 2 crates that we never logged. She insisted he must have imagined it. My boss insisted she was right. No one asked what I thought. Now corporate had the information, and the chain of blame was snapping upward with unavoidable force. My boss stalked across the floor, shouting for Tessa. his voice carrying through the aisles. She appeared from behind the counter with her usual bright expression, but the moment she saw his face, the gloss cracked. Her smile vanished. Her phone lowered. She asked what happened, trying to sound calm. Though her hands trembled just slightly, he told her. Or rather, he yelled it. He demanded to know where the logs were, where the paperwork was, where the vendor slips had gone. She fumbled through drawers she had stuffed full of coupons, half-used pens, energy drink cans, anything she did not feel like dealing with at the time. She had no idea what she was looking for. She had never learned. He kept insisting she had, reminding her that he had shown her everything I used to do. He said it like it was my fault she had not listened. I moved quietly around them, restocking small items, acting like their chaos was background noise. Panic spread through him in sharp waves. He stormed up to 2 other employees and accused them of misplacing inventory. He asked if someone was sabotaging the store. He said there must be someone intentionally causing problems. They looked horrified. Both of them loyal workers who had followed every instruction thrown at them. I kept my head down and let the accusations settle exactly where they belonged. Corporate called again requesting all-night reports for the last 10 days. 10 days of nothing. 10 days of Tessa ignoring the closing duties because she never stayed past 3 and never asked anyone else to finish them. 10 days of warnings I heard and chose not to repeat. My boss looked at her with a dawning horror that made the room feel strangely smaller. She stammered, saying she could redo them from memory, and I almost laughed. Instead, I walked to the stockroom to refill labels so they would not see the smile I could not hide. Hours stretched thin with tension. He kept pacing. She kept typing nonsense into the report system, hoping it would somehow align with the missing data. More emails arrived from corporate marked urgent. He read them with shaking hands. She bit her lip until it turned pale. The walls did not just close in. They pressed down. In the middle of it all, he glanced at me. It was brief, just a flicker, but in that moment he saw something he had refused to acknowledge. He saw that the stability he mocked, the constancy he belittled, the reliability he used and discarded, had been the structure holding his entire store upright. He looked away quickly, but the truth had already landed. They arrived without warning. I was slicing open a shipment in the back room when the front door chimed in a clipped rhythm that told me it was not customers. Corporate has a walk, a kind of tight posture that says they already know something is wrong and they have come to confirm it, not discover it. When I stepped out onto the floor and saw 2 suits and a regional manager striding toward the office, I knew the moment we had all been circling had finally arrived. My boss hurried over with a smile that twitched at the edges, but they brushed past him as if he were an obstacle instead of a manager. I followed quietly, not close enough to be intrusive, but close enough to observe the unraveling of the world he had built on the idea that loyalty would always disguise incompetence. They shut the office door behind them only halfway, leaving a gap wide enough for the entire staff to hear the tone, even if the exact words were lost in the shuffle. It was the tone that mattered. Sharp, impatient, surgical. They were not here for clarification. They were here for confirmation. When they emerged 10 minutes later, their eyes were fixed on the security monitor near the entrance. They asked who had access to the system. My boss swallowed before answering, glancing toward Tessa, who stood frozen behind the counter holding her phone as if it were a shield. They asked for footage from the last 2 weeks. He fumbled with the controls, pulling up the wrong days, clicking through menus he should have known by heart, but never bothered to learn because I had always been the one who handled it. One of the suits turned to me and asked if I knew how to navigate the system. My boss tried to interrupt, but the man waved him off and waited for my answer. I nodded and stepped forward, entering the sequence with the ease of someone who had done it more times than she could count. The footage played. They watched. Every missing item, every mishandled delivery, every skipped log, every moment Tessa had chosen to film instead of work. No one spoke, no one needed to. They asked questions only when the evidence was undeniable. Who usually completes the night reports? Who signs off on temperature logs? Who verifies delivered inventory? I answered calmly, explaining the routines I had followed for years and the routines that had vanished the moment she assumed my position. I did not embellish or criticize. I simply stated facts the footage already supported. Facts neither of them could spin into anything softer. My boss tried. He cleared his throat and said the staff had been adjusting to the transition. He said the systems were outdated. He said the vendor must have been confused. He said anything except the truth. The suits did not look at him while he spoke. They looked at me, they looked at the footage. They took notes. Each word he offered only added weight to the sinking floor beneath him. They pulled financial reports next, tracing discrepancies back to the exact day she took over. The numbers formed a pattern so clear it felt almost cruel. A rise in shortages, a dip in sales, a jump in waste, all clustered within the period where he had told me I was nothing more than training wheels in an F1 race. The irony sat in the room like a spotlight. When corporate announced that an immediate restructuring was required, my boss finally lost the last of his composure. His voice cracked as he insisted the store just needed time. His hands shook when he said his daughter had potential. His gaze darted between the suits and Tessa, who had begun to cry silently, mascara smudging as she clutched her phone with white knuckles. One of the suits delivered the final blow in a calm, almost gentle tone. The store had been stable for 15 years and unstable for 2 weeks. The instability was not mysterious. He knew what was coming before they said it. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, in the way he stopped meeting anyone's eyes. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The moment lingered, long enough for me to feel the tidal wave rising inside me. Years of dismissal, years of being overlooked, years of holding together something he took credit for. It had all led to this single point. They delivered the verdict in the office, the same cramped room where I had spent years solving problems while my boss pretended he was the one keeping the place stable. He sat in the chair behind the desk, with his shoulders rounded, his face slack, his hands clasped tightly together as if holding on could stop what was coming. Corporate laid out the findings in plain language. There was no dramatic flourish, no raised voices, just the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to removing the weak links in a chain. He tried to interrupt twice, but each time they continued speaking over him until he finally fell silent. When they told him his employment was terminated effective immediately, he blinked like he had not understood. I think some part of him truly believed the world he ruled inside these walls would protect him from any consequence, that the years he spent dismissing others and promoting his daughter would be repaid with loyalty. Instead, the room shifted around him, leaving him alone in the center of a choice he had made without ever realizing its cost. Tessa sniffled beside him, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. They told her she would also be removed, that her conduct had placed the store at risk. She opened her mouth to protest, but her father put a hand on her arm and shook his head. It was the first wise decision I had seen him make in a long time. After they escorted the two of them out the side door, the suits returned to the office and closed the door behind us. The regional manager regarded me for a moment with a thoughtful expression that made the room feel strangely still. She asked me how long I had been with the company. I said 15 years. Her eyebrows lifted in quiet acknowledgement. She asked if I understood the systems, the ordering cycles, the vendor relationships, the financials. I said yes because it was the truth. I had been managing those things informally for years, filling in gaps no one noticed until they became craters. She folded her hands and said the position of store manager was vacant, and they preferred to promote internally, rather than bring in someone unfamiliar with the operation. She asked if I would accept the role. There was no hesitation inside me, no flicker of doubt, no moment of wondering whether it was too soon or too much. The store already ran on my work. The systems already carried my imprint. The stability they needed was the stability I had built for more than a decade, without recognition. I said yes, and the word felt steady and clean in my mouth. The day continued like any other, except the air felt lighter. Employees approached me one by one, offering quiet congratulations that carried more sincerity than any compliment I had ever received from my former boss. Tessa did not return for her remaining belongings. She sent a message through someone else, asking if we could pack them up for her. I boxed them without anger, sealing her things with a strip of tape that felt like the closing of a chapter I had waited too long to see end. When the last customer left and the lights dimmed to their evening hum, I walked the floor slowly, checking shelves and straightening displays the way I had done 1,000 times. Yet everything felt different. The store no longer pressed against me, it rested with me. I locked the front door and stood there for a moment, my hand still on the key, feeling an exhale move through me that I had been holding for years without noticing. It was not triumph, and it was not revenge. It was release, pure and quiet. Later that night, sitting at my small kitchen table with a cup of tea, I thought about the strange symmetry of it all. People talk about betrayal as if it appears suddenly, but more often it grows in the spaces where effort is unnoticed and loyalty is assumed to be endless. Justice arrives in the same slow fashion. It builds quietly, thread by thread, until the weight of truth becomes too heavy to ignore. I had spent years being the silent one, the dependable one, the person who absorbed everyone else's mistakes, so the walls would not crumble. Silence is not weakness. It is patience waiting for the right moment to be heard.